Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Delighted to be at the dais once again and be able to share with you my experience and share a few thoughts related to this extremely vast field, which is very difficult to define in short, brief interaction that one has. But may I, before saying anything about the subject proper, may I just place my compliments to the organizers, the partners who have all been hand in glove to ensure that this event comes to place. I think it's fantastic to see a forum where you can have the policy makers, you have the manufacturers, you have the technical experts, and you have the people who have domain knowledge of these very, very niche and special areas to be able to share with each other so that you increase these canvas of knowledge of each and every one so that we can contribute in our own manner correctly and in a proper manner. And I'm extremely delighted to see the enthusiasm in the audience out here. I think this is something which needs to be replicated a lot more in North India, where we seem to have a lot of events, but we don't seem to have the, I would say, the gumption of the people and the interest levels of the same magnitude. So may I just compliment you all for a great setup that you have organized here on December 16th. May I also state that yesterday was an absolutely enlightening experience for the fact that there were very, very potent talks from people who were great specialists. We had the generalist who came and gave us an idea about the domain of cybersecurity and what this cyber domain has created for us. You and I are living in it. We are experiencing it daily, every moment. And I think a lot of speakers who came in yesterday also saw how the cyberspace, whether he has the Bluetooth, he cannot seem to connect if the technology doesn't go in. And this is something which I will touch upon in the end when we look at the structure and when we see some of our neighbors, how they're looking at it. And maybe at the policy level and at the organizational level, we'll have to see some amount of synergy and co-jointedness, whether you're looking in the electronic domain or you're looking in the cyber domain or you're looking in the area of perception management and information operations. I think this is an area we'll have to look at. So without much ado, may I just state that from hearing all the speakers yesterday and the experience that you and I all have, there is no doubt that our dependence on the cyber domain is increasing day by day, minute by minute. And I think today, with the focus of the government on Digital India, looking at creating an environment which facilitates functioning in a more efficient manner for one of the largest countries in the world and the greatest democracy that we have, I think the path that we are following is only going to see our involvement increasing day by day. And I think this is where I think the challenge lies for us. Whether it's governance, whether it's security, in all these areas, today we are looking at complexities which can only be done not by the human mind, but by the help of the computer. The minute that happens, there is an insatiable, I would say, desire in the system which forces the technocrats to start, or the technical men, to start making applications which will address these issues. And as these issues get addressed day in and day out, there is a pressure on people that we want faster computing speeds. We want speed of communications to improve in India. And that I was just reading in the papers a few days back that telecom companies are looking at carrier aggregation to try and increase the speed of interaction from one to the other. We were talking about, of course, moving to 4G, 3G, 4G, 4G plus. But I think the next speed is that how do you communicate all this data fastest? So that's another area which is coming up. But with all this, the greatest threat is that every time you get more and more embroiled and dependent on it, it can be exploited by the inimical elements. You could have the non-state actors, or you could have the state actors who would, for their own reasons, want to activate it. And I said today, when we look at the newspapers and media, if I just had to draw your attention to about a month back, when I saw Times of India and the Economic Times, what did it say? It said cybercrime went up in India by about 20%. We had the expert just speaking who's handling that particular sector. We had economic crimes which went up by about 5.3% or 6%. I mean, it's a quantum jump for a year. You actually are seeing 40% more cyber fraud cases being coming to light and being taken and made accountable. So when we are seeing this, the private citizen is one element that is affected. The second aspect that we are finding, which you get whether you take up on the net and you see so many reports, I think India happens to be in the top 10 countries which is faces cyber intrusions on a daily basis across the spectrum of activity. So whether you look at it in any government department, any critical structure, any economic setup, there are intrusions that are happening. And maybe that's the reason why a large number of people are now walking this tread, because there is a lot of money to be made in this whole fantastic world of cyber security and safety. So I think when we look at this area, so there is the private citizen, then there is the critical structures of the country which need to be looked at. And I was told about 2 years back, while I was still in service, we had shared a figure which I'm sure is public domain. They carried out a penetration test of various systems that exist in Delhi, and I think there were out of 3 lakh systems that were found, I think majority of them, that about 95% got penetrated. They belonged to areas which were very, very important places of work as far as the Indian government is concerned. So that means there are people who are intruding from outside in peacetime, putting in place their methodologies and structures to be able to exploit it when it has to be done. And maybe at the end I will, because one of the areas when we train our people in the armed forces, we do look at scenario building. So I will talk about how will we see the cyber war happening, just the tenets of it. And I think that will amplify that there is a need for all technical people who are making these great appliances to ensure that there is an inbuilt security in the system which can be done. And I think there are measures which will have to be also taken by the government to ensure that the private citizen is protected while the public face is done. May I also state that there is no doubt that Asia is becoming the digital pivot. I mean, the pivot to Asia as far as USA move is concerned, of the economic center of gravity has shifted to the Asia Pacific. With this happening, there is no doubt that if the pivot and the digital pivot is shifting towards Asia, India needs to find a place for itself in the policy making structures so that you can control the area which is going to matter in the future. And this is where I feel is the requirement where the government and the policy makers come in, where we need to be part of those UN think tanks which are getting together to form, or the governmental bodies which are looking at ICT security structures. You're looking at the Talent 2 being rehashed and re-looked at. I mean, these are the areas where the government and policy makers will have to come in to ensure that the functioning in the global domain in the cyberspace, we have and our interests are looked after when policies and decisions are made at the top level. If we had to also look at the other aspect that comes out is that when we have these bodies and organizations, one is to look at private, that is the proactive methodology of reacting once you've been able to find a crime. But I think the requirement is to be able to prevent it. So I think preemptive and actions which are preventive will have to be taken whenever you have such structures going inside. So I think that's an area we have to look at whenever we are carrying out the methodology. How do we see cyber warfare? I think 2 things, I will not talk about definitions and all, but I think cyber warfare has made 2 things very clear, that the military and the non-military domain is no longer sacrosanct and there are clear dividing lines. No, I think there is a great stage of gray which mixes both the military and the non-military domain. So today, wherever you are looking at any organization for cyber security or for cyber defense, it has to take the strength of the military and the non-military sector into it. The military sector, when I talk about it, I'll just draw your attention to what is happening across the world. I mean, just about a few months back, Taiwan has raised a new command, which is a new force which is only for the cyber command. You've suddenly had this restructuring which has happened in China, starting with 1st Jan 2016, where he's created the support forces. And in the support forces, what has he done? Which I alluded to, you have the cyber and the active hackers, as he wants to put them, the offensive and defensive lot. You've got the electronic medium, and you've got the space medium, which is the satellite and the surveillance. So, and what is his aim? That by 2050, he wants to be the electronically dominant power in the world. So this synergy that is happening will have to be looked at in the structures that we create so that there is a synergy on top, and this So this synergy is maintained. We look at across in the USA, it's only a few years back that they raised the US Cyber Command. So I think, why are we talking about this military structure? The reason is that the method of discipline and functioning that a military structure gives you, it can provide the accountability and a timeline growth which no other organization can provide. I mean, I could make that little wager, but I'm being part of the uniformed forces myself. But undoubtedly, if I go by the experience of what I see in Taiwan, what I see in China, they are responsible not only for the military forces, but they're looking at the pan-national interest. And that is where the public-private partnerships have come in. The methodology of the structures and employment has changed. If today you and I look at DARPA, which is the research wing of the USA, it employs people for 3 years and maximum 5 years, and it's project oriented. It has 120 people, and about 70 of them come from South Asia. I mean, that is from our part of the world. So you find that the structures have to be different. So when our policymakers are looking at organization structures, we'll have to break away from this present system of a hierarchical system of government naukri, this is the salary. I mean, you need an expert, then you pay for that guy. You can't have an L1 vendor system out here. Then you'll only get an L1. Yeah, you'll not get the best. So if I need the best, then I pay him the best. I use his services till he's relevant. Then he's not relevant, we tell him, take a walk. You don't have to give pension, कि मेरे को pension भी चाहिए उसके बाद. Are you getting my point? The structure will have to change. And this is where I think will be the strength of our organizational changes. If I had to say, where did cyber warfare really emanate from? I think there are two turning point events. We are all aware of Stucknest and this denial of services attack, where political and national aims can be achieved by indirect means. That will all happen in color revolution. The color revolutions. Just check. No, it's not mine. Just keep it with you, though. No problem. Okay. Sorry. So when I was talking, which were the two areas where we really had it? If you look at it, Georgia in 2008, when Russia went in and created that Abkhazia as a separate thing, it preceded cyber attacks before there was a physical assault. And when we look at its replication again, we see it what happened in Ukraine, what he calls a collinear war. So I think the domain of cyber warfare saw that the targets are not military at all times. The methodology of hitting the mind comes in. So the diffusion that I said between military and non-military targets and structures which employs military and non-military personnel together is the answer for any future strength that we need to look at in the organization as far as we are concerned. May I also just put it that a corollary to that would be that the cyber warriors that we select do not have to be a man in uniform. It has to be a man who comes in who's an expert. You could have private hackers. I mean, today all of you have been talking about how the Chinese hacking systems and botnets operate. There's a command and control setup which starts in Philippines and controls things whether in India or in the US to hit somebody else who's sitting maybe in Europe here. So I think the whole system works in a very different manner. So I think we'll have to look at structures which will allow us to do it. It doesn't have to be in the public domain, but I think it'll have to be in the national domain for a structure like this to function and execute. So when I look at, if this be what the warfare can do of non-military, then what is the cyber defense to look at? I mean, I'll just touch upon 2 or 3 points. The first thing that you would look in cyber defense is that to prevent any untoward incident. And the second issue is that if it happens, then I think you should be able to oppose any such intrusion that happens into your computers and to your network systems that happen. If that happens, what does it require? Why I'm saying is there has to be a preemptive and a proactive approach. And what we came out from the cyber warfare is that the offensive component is as much a relevant issue as far as the defensive component is concerned. So when you're looking at cyber warfare, I think to say that we are only being defensive about it, we put in passive structures and pieces, I don't think is the answer. You'll have to develop the offensive capability as part of your defensive strategy. So this cyber offense and defense will have to be part. And as a national policy, when we talk about a structure having it, it doesn't have to say of only safety and security standards that have to come in. Yet that is one aspect which is very critical, but you also have to increase the domain and create the skill force which can carry out this activity on your behalf to be able to preempt that attack which is happening here. I don't want to fight a battle sitting in my drawing room. I'd like to fight it in the other guy's bedroom, if that be the case. And it's the same story today what you saw in Jammu and Kashmir. We decided we don't want to keep fighting and knocking the guy who comes across the border to us. We'd like to come and do it and kick his ass across the border. So please, in the computer world, in cyber security, I think offense and defense will have to be the same. So you will have to be able to intrude, be able to sit there and give him a kick in his backside so that he knows that he doesn't fiddle around with your own system. Otherwise, he'll keep fiddling however much of security parameters and systems that we place into place. So I think these are points that we have to look at. And I think, what was the take on this F-35, the Sony Corporation? I think the greatest change that you saw in the American mindset was that the getting in of the public and the public enterprises involved in the activity hereafter. So it is not that there is a demarcation between the two, but he's now made sure that they get involved. So these public-private partnerships for organizations to function in the domain for security, for offensive capability, for the issue of looking at analysis, the analytics across the spectrum, I think you will have to look at it very seriously. If China is one of the largest players who seems to be looking, and today when we look at our security paradigm, he happens to be our neighbor. We don't seem to have great relationships, and we seem to be one of the largest attacked areas of interest from his side. And if we see the weaknesses that exist, I think we will have to start looking at some of the issues very urgently. I mean, I won't tread on the fact we are all aware here what the systems have happened in India. But just to give you an idea, the policy of cybersecurity started in 2003 in America. It's only in about 14 or 15, a gap of about 10 to 12 years, that it has matured to be what it is today.